Hello everyone and welcome to my web development, cloud and IoT education channel. My name is Thomas, I'm a full stack developer, and today in this video I'm going to show you how to build fully functioning REST API with input data validation included and DynamoDB serving as a data storage. Everything deployed to AWS as a set of Lambda functions thanks to the Serverless Framework. However, before we can get started, there are two requirements to meet that I'm just going to quickly talk about. The first one is AWS CLI installed and configured on your machine, and second one is Serverless NPM package installed globally. If you haven't done this yet, check my other video where I explain how to do this step by step. You can find the link in the description of this video. Now, let's get straight to building the REST API. Okay, so let's start from opening a command line where first of all, I'm going to change directory to projects. This is where I keep all of my projects basically. And from here, I'm going to run serverless create command where I specified template URL to my template repository with a serverless TypeScript project and a path that's going to be a directory this command is going to create and where it's going to pull all of these files from that template. I called it products API because product is going to be our resource in our REST API. That's going to be something we're going to be operating on. I picked product because it's very common, right? Like in internet stores, e-commerce systems. Okay, I'm going to press enter now, and that should download all the files and move them to products API. Now I can change directory to products API. And I can run code and dot. That should open Visual Studio Code. And there we go, Visual Studio Code opened. So what we can see here are the files downloaded from my template repository, serverless TypeScript template repository. What we've got here is a few files. The most important files are package.json, right? This is where we have all the dependencies, tsconfig with TypeScript configuration, serverless.yaml with all the infrastructure configuration, and src handlers.ts. This is where the code is kept, right? And as you can see right now, we've got an error here because this module cannot be found. Right, the problem is with the dependencies, they're not installed yet, and that's going to be the first step. So I'm going to go to terminal, and in terminal, I'm going to run yarn, right? Can be yarn or npm install, depending on what package manager you use for Node.js. I use yarn, so just done that. Let's give it a few seconds. Okay, done. And now before I move to the infrastructure configuration, I'm going to do one extra step with my Visual Studio Code. I'm going to go to Code Preferences and Settings, because what I would like to do is to change the default formatter, right? So I just typed format and then default formatter. Let me just close the terminal. I'm going to change it to prettier. And what is important is to have these options here, these select boxes ticked, right? So I have format on paste, format on save, and format on type. Okay, I'm gonna close it. You can do it at the workspace level if you want. What this is gonna do is basically work with this prettier RC configuration and auto format my code whenever I change something in here and I save. That's going to just automatically format it for me. Nice. Okay, so I've got my workspace configured. Now let's move to the infrastructure. So I'm going to close handlers for now and package.json, because what we're going to focus on is the data storage first, right? Because we need to have a place where we keep all of the data, all of our products. And that place is going to be DynamoDB table. For that, we can use a resources section in serverless.yaml file. This is where we can add CloudFormation, AWS CloudFormation resource templates. I've prepared this beforehand, so let me just copy paste it. Okay, there we go. So as you can see, this follows this pattern, commented out pattern here. We've got resources, then resources again, then the name of the resource. This is up to us what the name is gonna be. Then we have a type of the resource. In our case, this is DynamoDB table, and properties of that resource. And these properties are table name, which is a product table again, right? Provisioned throughput. This is the number of reads and writes our table will be able to do in a second, right? So higher this value is, more operations you can do simultaneously in 1 second on that table, right? I picked one because, you know, this is an example project, and also I don't want to generate a high cost, right? Because, you know, basically more units you utilize, more cost you may generate, and then you have to pay to AWS. And then two extra additional properties. We've got attribute definitions and key schema. And this is quite important because DynamoDB is a document database. So the documents you store in a table can have any sort of properties, right? It's not restricted. It's not like with relational database where you need to define all of the column names. Here you can just, you know, create anything you want. However, you need to specify a partition key. And that partition key is something like a primary key in database, right? So that's a unique value key that identifies a document in a table. In my case, it is a product ID, so I picked it as a product ID. In the attribute definitions, you need to specify the type of this key, and the type I specified is string. You have a choice between string, number, and binary, but I'm just going to use a UUID here, so string is the best type. And then in the key schema, this is where you actually tell that you use this particular attribute as a partition key, which is a type hash. There's other optional key you can specify in DynamoDB table. It's called sort key. It allows you to make a specific queries to retrieve the data from the table, but I'm not really gonna go into details, at least not today. I'm probably gonna cover this in the future. However, if you are interested in that, have a look at the description of the video. I left a link to AWS DynamoDB documentation. Cool. Okay, so that's the resource. And now a second step is going to be to define IAM role statements. And again, I prepared something beforehand. So let me just again copy paste. Okay. So here are the role statements. Why this is important is because creating a resource on its own is not really allowing for our Lambda functions to access these resources. We need to specify the permissions explicitly with AWS, right? And in Serverless Framework, you do it through IAM role statements. So basically by adding this section in here, I'm telling AWS that this particular Lambda functions I have specified in here are going to have access to this, to perform these operations, right? Which is put item, get item, delete item, and scan on this resource. And that resource is our products table. So what's happening actually here, that uses CloudFormation function get attribute to get products table unique AWS identifier, right? ARN, that's the name of the AWS unique identifier. So essentially that's gonna return a string, this identifier, and that's gonna set permissions, right, to perform these operations. Nice, okay. So now the last step is to actually define the functions. And here I'm actually gonna do it along with the implementation. So let's open handlers.ts. And let me show you how this actually points to the code, right? So here in the functions, we can specify the function name. This is internal name because what's important is where this function points to. And it points to src/handlers. and this is a src handlers.ts file. And .hello is basically pointing to the exported function of the same name, right? So we've got hello here and hello there. And basically when this Lambda function is executed, it's gonna execute the code from the hello function. However, we've got something missing in here because at this moment, we're not really able to access this function using HTTP client, right? HTTP communication, because there is no event specified. So the only thing you could do is to use AWS CLI to run this Lambda function. When I add this section over here with events and HTTP API, I'm gonna turn this into an endpoint, an actual endpoint behind API gateway. The example one is a get endpoint, right, with the path /users create. And when you call this endpoint using HTTP client or even browser, right, because the method is get, this code is going to be executed and we're going to get this body as a result, right? However, I'm not really going to be deploying this because that's not the goal of this video. We're building REST API on products. So I think the first step is going to be to rename this function because we don't want to do hello world, but create product, get product, update product, delete product, and maybe one extra to list all of the created products, right? So yeah, for the handler, I'm going to rename it to create product. So let's just quickly do it. Because this is pointing to create product now, I'm going to rename this to create product as well. And in here, I'm just going to use REST API, RESTful specification, right? So what you do for creating a resource is you use the path to the resource and use post as a method, right? So that's the create product. And now let's implement this endpoint, right? So create product, what it should do, it should create a new document in our DynamoDB table, right? Like insert. In order to do that, first of all, I need to import AWS SDK. It is already installed here. That's going to be AWS SDK. And I need to create the actual document client. That's the name of that DynamoDB client. Let me just quickly show you. So that's document client instance, right? That's the only thing you need to do. You don't need to specify any connection string. Everything is going to happen automatically. So doc client is basically our DynamoDB client. That's going to be the instance I'm going to use. And now let's create something with it. Let me show you how to create something with it. So I'm going to use async await syntax. So let's just do doc client dot and put where you need to specify the following properties. Table name, that's going to be products table, right? It's exactly the same name as I specified in the resources over here, right? Products table. And then the next one we need is an actual item, right? And this is where we have to specify product ID, right? We need to specify that. That's our partition key. And as I said, I want to use UUID for product IDs. So what I'm going to do is to install an external dependency, UUID. I need to add the types as well, because this is TypeScript. Right. So we've got UUID. And now when I just call v4, that's going to generate a random hash v4 UUID. But that's not everything, right? We don't just want to create an item with a product ID property. We want to have all of the properties that has been sent in the body. So let's just define a new constant and use a JSON parse to parse our event body. I need to cast it as a string though, because it might be null. For now, I'm just gonna go with the positive path, so I'm not really gonna be handling errors yet, but I'm gonna move to it later, no worries. Right, now this await, actually, we've got an issue here. It says has no effect of the title of this expression. This is because if you want to use async await syntax, you need to use a promise method on the doc client. Right, okay, so now this is actually going to create it, but except for the product ID, I'm gonna use the sprite operator on the request body. So basically our item now is gonna be whatever we send in the event body, hopefully is a JSON, and then product ID with auto-generated ID. Right, so that's the create product. However, one more thing that would be actually nice is to, instead of sending this default success message, to send an actual product item, right? The actual product. So I'm gonna move this. Let's extract it to a variable that I'm gonna call product, right? And then I'm gonna pass it in here. And we also going to respond with that. So we will see newly created a product. Nice. So yeah, create product is done. Let's move to the next one. Let's do get product now. And to add get product, I'm gonna go back to functions and we're going to define a second function. Let's call it get product. Get product in here. And the method now is gonna be get, but this is getting a single product, right? So we need to have a way to specify the product ID that we want to retrieve, right? So I'm gonna do it in the path. That's gonna make basically an endpoint with the path parameters, right? I'm going to show you how to read it. So having get product, let's go to handlers. And again, let's create a new function. Get product this time. And because I specified this path parameter ID here in the path, I can now access it like that. So I can do const ID equals event dot path parameters question mark and ID. A question mark because ID might be undefined, which is not really gonna be the case with serverless framework and this configuration, but this is how the types are defined. So yeah, we actually gonna get something for the ID. Right, so having ID, now let's use doc client to retrieve a document from DynamoDB, and that document is gonna be the product basically, right? So we're gonna use the get method, and for get method, we need to specify a table name as well. So because I've already used products table in here, let me just maybe create a constant in here. Const variable, right? So let's call it table name, products table, and now I can actually table name, sorry. So that'd be table name. And what we're looking for is a document with a specific key, and that key is product ID. And that's our ID that we retrieved from the path parameters, right? Also, obviously, I need to use a promise, and I need to assign the result of this promise to a variable. Let's call it output, because that's not gonna give us a product straight away. There is some additional data on the output. So basically, output is an object, and we have a consumed capacity and item. An item is going to be a product if the product exists, right? So if that document exists, we're gonna get it. If not, I'm actually going to return 404 status code, and body is gonna be something like JSON stringify, and let's do something like error not found. So if there is no item on the output, right, we're returning 404. That means it doesn't exist. Otherwise, I'm just gonna return it. So that'll be status code 200 and body JSON stringify, and that's gonna be our output item. Okay. So yeah, so that's get product. So we've got create product and get product. I think at this point, I could give it a go. Let me just confirm if everything is fine. So get product, create product. Maybe I change the status code to 201. That's a bit better because that means created instead of OK. And serverless configuration. Yeah, that seems to be good. Right. Okay. Yeah. Let's give it a quick test. So I'm going to open a new terminal. Right. I actually have lots of terminals in here. I might actually close them. Okay. And to deploy our Lambda functions, we just need to call serverless deploy. And that's going to take a few seconds or minutes. Okay, done. So as we can see in the output, we have two endpoints now, post and get. Let's start from post one. Let's create a new product. So I'm going to copy this and paste it into my Postman, right? My Postman HTTP client. Let me just create a new request. I'm going to change a method to post. And let's specify some JSON request body, right? So let's create a product, maybe with a name, iPhone X, description, and the price. Maybe that's enough. Okay, and let's send this now. Nice. Okay, so what we get back is almost the same JSON object, except for the product ID, right? So that's been generated with a UUID. And now we can use this ID to, let me just show you, to retrieve a product using get, right? So we need to specify the ID as a part of the path. So I'm gonna go back to Postman and gonna paste it here. So as you can see, we've got now just /product/ our UUID. And when I send it, I should get back. There we go. That's what we got, right? The product that I've created. So our endpoints are working well. However, there is no validation at this point. If I break this somehow, so let's say I change this JSON to text and send something different, I'm probably gonna get something like 500. Let me just see. Yeah. Okay, so I get internal server error. This is because we don't have a body validation, but no worries. Again, I'm going to do it. Right. Okay, let's go back to the code and implement the rest of the endpoints. So what we've got missing is a delete, there is update, and finally a list. So let's just quickly add them. For the update product, I changed the method to put, right? The path stays the same, right? Because we want to specify, we want to give the ID of a product we want to update. But for REST APIs, for the update operation, we use a put method. Then it's going to be very similar situation with delete product. So we also need to specify ID as a path parameter. But the method this time is going to be delete. And finally, the list endpoint is going to be more like a create one. That's why I copied it from there. Let's call it a list product. let's give it a get method, and maybe let's change the path to products. So it's gonna be a bit better, right? Using the plural here, that means we're getting a list of products. Okay, right, let's implement these functions now in the handler. So we've got get product. Let's do update product now. So maybe I just, again, copy paste from here and just rename it to update product. Update product. And for updating the product, this is going to be, again, important because with DynamoDB document client, there are actually two ways of doing that, but I think the simplest way to update something is to use a put method on the doc client as well, because put works as like an upsert. Basically, it creates an item, creates in our case a product in the products table if it doesn't exist, but if it does exist, then it's just gonna replace it, right? So if the product ID of this product that you specify here does exist in a table, then it's just gonna update it, right? It's gonna update it with whatever else you've got on your product. And I'm just gonna use the put upsert operation. What I'm gonna need to do in update product is to get it first to make sure it does exist, because if it doesn't exist, update product would create a new one, and that's not the behavior we would like to have, right? We want to return 404, right? Not found if the product we're trying to update doesn't exist. So that's gonna be the first step. So let's just copy this and paste over here. And then let's copy this and paste here, right? The only difference in the product itself to what has been in create is that we want to specify ID. So the one that we retrieved from the path parameters. And finally, what I want to do is, again, return a status code of 200 and a body with JSON stringify product. Okay, nice. So that's our update product. However, you've probably noticed we have some duplication, right? We have a duplication with get product and we have a duplication with create product. We can get rid of this duplication easily by introducing simple error handling. And that's actually going to be also useful for the body, for the request body validation that I'm going to introduce later. So maybe let's just start doing it right now. So that's going to be the first logic that I can extract to a separate function and then reuse it in update product. Let me just show you how can we do that efficiently. So let's create a new function. Let's call it fetch product by ID maybe. And let's specify the actual ID as an argument. Let's make it asynchronous because we're gonna use async await syntax in there. And then simply let's just copy this and paste in here. Right, so that's what we're gonna do. But instead of returning status code with the body, I'm gonna use error handling. So I'm gonna throw an error instead. Let me specify a new error. I'm gonna call it HTTP error because it's gonna end up with the Lambda responding with an actual error status code and message. It's gonna extend from the base error. And then we will have a constructor where we can, first of all, let's allow for specifying something like a body. That's gonna be a record string to unknown. So basically any sort of JavaScript object. as long as the keys are strings. And then let's do something like a status code as well. But you know what? Maybe what I'm gonna do is to specify it first. So we'll have a status code as number and body as a record. And let's make this actually a public property. Okay. I need to call super with, let's do it with JSON stringify of the body, right? So that's how the error is going to be created. One more thing, let's make this body like that, right? Okay, so we'll have this HTTP error, and when this happens, we're going to actually throw this error instead. So we'll do HTTP error 404, and then for the body, I'm just gonna use the error not found. Okay. And as a result, I'm just gonna return output item. So we have our fetch product by ID. And now in get product, I can use this instead. So what I'm gonna do is to do maybe something like const product equals await fetch product by ID. And I can actually specify this. I can pass it right to that function straight away, but I need to cast it as a string. Right, and then we can return stringified product. Right, that's not everything though, because now we have to put it in a try catch block and we need to handle this error. Right, so in here, if we have error, there is an instance of HTTP error. So if we have something like that, HTTP error, then we want to return something like that. Status code, and then body is gonna be just message. Nice. Okay, and if this is not an HTTP error, I'm just going to return something like this. So it's still gonna throw an error that's gonna result with 500 internal server error, because that's gonna be an error we actually don't expect, right? Okay, so with that logic now, I can use that in an update. Right, so in an update, I can do something very similar, but actually I don't need a product here. I just need to run fetch product by ID to make sure this error, the HTTP error, is not thrown. But that's still one more thing. Okay, so this actually needs to be an ID. So let's do it like that. So ID equals right. So now this is better. And try catch. Try catch. And here again, to not repeat myself, what I can do is to introduce another function. Let's call it handle error. And what it's gonna do is simply what happens in this catch, right? So we're just gonna do something like that, and then I can just do return handle error and pass E. Same thing can happen in here, right? So we removed all of the duplication in the code. Right, there is still some duplication on creating the product, like on parsing, right? But I'm gonna handle it later when I validate the request body. Okay, the next step, delete product. So for delete product, it's gonna be a bit simpler because there is no more refactoring needed. I just need to create delete product function. And then I still want to verify if that product exists. So we will have something like that. And we also have a try catch. Where we return handle error. But then right after this, what I'm going to do is to run await doc client dot delete, where again I need to specify table name and then the key, which is the product ID, and that product ID is this. So I think actually this might be good idea to create this const variable and use it instead. So we'll do something like that, right? Also with the promise. Right. Okay, last step is to return proper status code. Let's go for 204 for delete. So I'm not really gonna return anybody, just 204 that this to indicate that this operation has been successful. Right, so we've got delete, we've got update, we've got get and create. The last one left is the list product. And list product is gonna be, I think, the simplest of all of those, because for the list product, I just need to run doc client scan method. So scan basically scans all of the records in our DynamoDB table. We can specify some conditions in here, but I'm not really gonna do it because I just want to retrieve all of the products from DynamoDB table. So we're gonna get output like that. And then I'm just going to return status code 200. And then for the body, we will have JSON stringify and output items. Right, so we should get a list of items. Right, so yeah, this is pretty much it in terms of all of these endpoints that we have specified. And now we can give it a go. So I can deploy all of these changes, and a Serverless Framework along with AWS is going to detect all of the changes I've done, all of the additional new endpoints we've created, and deployed only those. So let's open a terminal. And then in the terminal, I'm going to execute a serverless deploy. Okay, done. We've got list of all of our endpoints. So let's test it. Let's test it out. If I open Postman now and I try to go to the get call, right? The get request I've done. If I send it, I should get back the product I've created beforehand, right? So that means it doesn't create a new table, right? If table already exists, it doesn't wipe anything out. It's all there. Our data is safe. Nice. Okay, so I tested post and get and haven't really changed much in it except for the get that we've actually tested and it's working. So let's try to do update now. So for update, it's going to be exactly the same endpoint as this one. Like the URL actually is going to be the same, but the method is going to be different. So I'm going to create a new request, just copy paste from get and change the method to put. And then for the body, I'm going to specify a different JSON. Maybe let's go to post and let's go back to our previous request body, and then let's copy paste it and slightly modify it. So maybe let's upgrade our iPhone and let's change the price. Okay, so I'm gonna send it. And there we go. So we got back exactly same UUID, but we've updated data. If I go back to get request and call it again, I should get in a response updated data, and that is correct. Okay, let's see how the delete works. So for the delete, again, I can copy this URL, create a new request, paste it in, and just change the delete. And then let's send it and let's see what's gonna happen. That's it. We didn't get any content, but we got 204, no content basically, but that means that record has been deleted. If I go back to get and I try to send it, I'm getting 404 not found, which is what we wanted to get, right? Because I deleted that record. So yeah, let's go back to post and create a new one again. And maybe let's create another one. So we'll have two products. And having two products, let's test the last endpoint, which is the least one, right? So that's just get products. And when I do send, I should get back a list of the products. And this is what I've got, right? So we've got both of them as a collection. However, I've just realized there is something wrong in here, because the way we've got this response body formatted is not really correct. Let me just confirm if the header, content type header, is application JSON. Okay, this is not. We've got text plain, right? I need to fix that because the content type of our REST API is JSON, not text plain, right? So it should be application/JSON here. Let me show you how to fix it. It is quite simple. So I'm going to go back to the code, and then in the code, wherever I return, right, the API Gateway Proxy result, this is where I am supposed to specify response headers. So what I'm going to do is actually create a constant at the top of this handlers.ts file. Let's call it headers, actually. And let's add a content type header, application/JSON, like that. And then wherever we have a return in these handler functions, I'm just going to add headers like that. Right, so let's just quickly do it. So we should have headers, not really here. We should have headers in here as well. And then in here. But this is actually not needed in here because that's empty, but it is important to add it here. Right. So if I deploy the code now, and then we go to postban and send the same request again to get the products list, I should get them nicely formatted, right? So now the header is right. We get application JSON, and that's the JSON format that we get here. If I go to get endpoint, but let me just check. Let me just change the ID to this one, to the existing one, right? Actually, it doesn't really matter because if I do send, that should also be formatted. But let's get entire product here. And there we go, right? This is an actual JSON response. Right, okay, so now the last bit that's left on our REST API is the request body validation, right? Because if I go back to post, I showed you this already, and if I mess something up in here, right, then basically we're going to get the internal server error. But I would like to get something like incorrect request body, right? And also this API allows for any sort of field, right? So you can specify any field in here and that field is going to be accepted, which might not be the case for certain. I think not certain, it's actually for most of REST APIs, you want to have a fixed property names that you accept, or you may have some optional, some required, right? But essentially what I'm talking about is a request body validation at the object, at the JSON object level. So not just the format that should be valid JSON, but also the properties of the JSON, right? The names of the properties and the types of the values. So yeah, let me just quickly show you how can we do that in the code. So we have our request bodies validated. So in order to do that, maybe let me close these terminals, and we're gonna go to create product first. So if this request body fails, right? If this fails, it's going to throw a syntax error, and this is how we know the JSON was incorrect. What I can do is to put this again in a try-catch block, like I've done with the update and with get, as far as I remember. And I can use a handle error, right? I can use return handle error and then basically handle it there. So I can add another if statement that checks if the instance of error is a syntax error. And if it's a syntax error, then we're going to actually not return. Yeah, we're going to return something like status code. Maybe let me copy paste this. So we will have a status code that is 400, right? Same headers, but the message, maybe the message actually can be like that, where we actually put the original message, but we will also add something like invalid request body format, and then the original message of syntax error. Let's do something like that, right? So our handle error is going to handle a syntax error. And now let's do the actual validation of the properties. For that, let me use an external library, because I think that's going to be the simplest and fastest way. So I actually need a terminal now. Let me create a new one. And let's add yup. That's the name of the package. Right, okay, that's been added. I don't need to install types for it because it's already included in the library. So now let's just import it here. Come on. Okay, so we've got our yup, and now the way you use it is you define a schema. So that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna define a schema for an object of shape where I specify all of the properties I require. So let's say we require a name, which is supposed to be a string, and it's required. Let's say we have a description, right? Which is again string and required. And then a price, which is a number this time, right? So we'll have a number and is required. And finally, maybe let's add a new one, available, right? And this time, this is gonna be a Boolean and also required. Right, so that's how this is done. We've got a schema. And now with the schema, what I'm just gonna do is to validate it, use the validate method on the schema itself. But that's asynchronous operation, so I need to do await. So you're gonna do here, we're gonna do schema.validate, and then I'm gonna pass a request body, right? So that's how this is validated. And that's going to happen for create product, but also for update product, which is over here, right? So once we have verified that the product we're trying to update exists right in here, let's make sure it's in a valid format. Okay. Right, so that's the validation part. And now what happens if the validate fails? It throws an error, a validation error. And because we have one place where we handle the errors, I can go to handle error and again add another if statement. And if that error is a validation error, yup validation error, I can return again status code 400 headers and body, which is going to be maybe, you know what, actually I have realized it is a bit incorrect in the syntax error. I'm gonna fix it in a second. So yeah, that should be JSON stringify. So we have JSON stringify, and here we will have something like errors, because there is an errors property with all of the errors on yup. And I need to fix that one as well, because that should be JSON stringify, and let's return it like that. That's gonna be much better. Right. Okay, and one last thing, because this is actually related to this errors way of validating. So basically, I don't want yup to fail fast. I think abort early is the name of the option that you need to specify and change it to false, because otherwise it's true. So that's gonna give us all of the errors, not just the failed one, right? So if we don't have a name and description, we will get the information that these two fields are missing, right? Otherwise, if this is true, we would just get name is missing, right? And only when you fix the name, then you get the description error. That's not something I would like. So yeah, let's just fix that also in the update. And there we go. Right, so this is the validation that's handled in our handle error. And I think I can now create a new terminal and run serverless deploy to deploy all of the changes. And then we should see our REST API fully working. Okay, deployed. So let's go to Postman now. And let's try, maybe let's try from post. So I'm gonna break it intentionally and let's see what's gonna be the error message. Okay, so this is what we're getting. We have invalid request body format, unexpected token JSON at position 11. Right. So that's what we received, and we have a 400 bad request. Let's try to create a new product, but with missing field, right? Now we require available field as well. Let's see what we get. Okay, we have available field, available is required field, right? If I remove another field, I should get more errors. And this is what I got, right? Description, required field, available as well. Right, let's fix it. So I'm gonna add available. Let's set it to true. And this is working, right? If I change that to maybe to number, then what we're getting is available must be Boolean type, but the final value was 2323, right? So it also checks for the types. Nice, okay. So that's the post. So create works perfectly, as we can see. Let's see how get works again. So if I do that, yeah, I'm getting the result correctly, right? Let's move to put. I'm just gonna copy this UUID because that's the one I'm going to update. Right. And let's change it to maybe old iPhone. Right. And there's gonna be a missing field. So let's see what's gonna happen. Right, we've got errors. Available is required field now. So that also working. I mean, the validation, right, is also working for the put method for update. So let's say it's not, right? I'm gonna send it and it is updated now with the new values. Right, okay. Let's do the same thing with delete. So I'm gonna go to delete and test it again. So let's remove this one. Right, we got 204, and now I should get 404 because it's not there anymore, right? It's been removed from database. And finally, let's have a look at our products. Right, so we can see there is a new field available, and we have only 2 phones in here because I removed the third one, the one I have created with the post. Nice. Okay. So yeah, everything is working. Our REST API is done. We could actually add some extra features, but I encourage you to experiment with that. You can find the link to my GitHub with all of the code I've written today in the description of the video. My suggestion would be to improve list endpoint. So we can add some sorting there, maybe a search, right? You can experiment with a different method on the document client, which is called query. And you can look into secondary indexes of DynamoDB. It's a very interesting subject. I'm going to cover it in the future, but if you are interested in DynamoDB in general, I really recommend looking into it. And this is it for today. Thanks for watching. If you find my content useful, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. If there is a subject you would like me to make a video about, let me know in the comments. Cheers, bye.